had written, they had a long correspondence, and Charles Darwin ran a lot of, perhaps all of the Origin of Species by Joseph Hooker before publishing. So they were very like-minded scientists, but they disagreed strongly about biogeography. So Darwin noted the general pattern that Hooker had drawn attention to, but he thought that they could be best explained by dispersal from a point of origin. And then he appealed, interestingly, to what was then our ignorance of former climatic and geographic changes, and thought that because we didn't know anything about how the geology of the Southern Hemisphere had changed, if at all, and we didn't really know about climatic change, that the best explanation was to say that each individual plant group had gotten to where it was on its own steam, not as a result of some general process shared that influenced all of those plant groups. And that's how we thought that America, Australia, and New Zealand had the same kind of floras of closely related plants. So, this supported his idea of species originating from centres of origin, very, very restricted centres, and then dispersing out from those centres. So this is the kind of hypothesis that Darwin favoured. A centre of origin in one part of the distribution, and then dispersal across, in this case, wide ocean gaps to other parts of the distribution. And you can see these competing explanations for general biogeographic patterns competing with one another, with each other over the following 100 years. And amongst most zoologists and probably most botanists as well, the Darwinian approach to historical biogeography prevailed. So people, when they were discussing biogeography, would invent dispersal routes by which these, the plant or animal groups that they're investigating had got to where they are now. And however, that default option, if you like, that default explanation took a real battering when the geological revolution of plate tectonics came along. So in the late 50s, early 60s, deep sea drilling, a deep sea drilling project run by the American Navy discovered that the ocean floors of the Earth are striped. They're striped with magnetic anomalies, and so every now and again, the Earth's magnetic field reverses in its orientation. So if this happened now, our compasses would point to the south instead of to the north. And when igneous rocks solidify, so let's say volcanic rocks that are solidifying from magma cooling, when they solidify, the magnetic orientation of the crystals in those rocks, especially, I guess, iron-rich crystals, is cemented in place. And so when you look at the orientation of the magnetic fields of crystals in the rocks of the seafloor are mapped across the ocean floor. They form stripes that are parallel to mid-ocean ridges. And that pattern was best explained by those mid-ocean ridges being spreading ridges. So they were producing new seafloor crust that was being pushed out from the mid-ocean ridges, and this was causing continental blocks, which are composed of lighter rocks that ride around the top of those, on the top of oceanic floor, the crust, get pushed around by these moving seafloors. So plate tectonics was a hypothesis that's now very strongly corroborated to explain continental drift. Continental drift, the idea had come up much earlier, and most notably in the early 20th century, when two scientists, Alfred Wegener and a South African geologist, Dutoit, independently came up with the idea of continental drift. And they based that hypothesis on the fit of continents with one another and the distribution of certain fossil groups across the reconstructions you can make by treating continental margins like, or continental outlines like jigsaw puzzle pieces, and you put them together. And then you find that certain, the distributions of certain fossils from over 100 million years ago line up quite nicely in what look like unified distributional patterns across an Earth in which the continents are all sort of stuck together in a single ancestral supercontinent. So in subsequent years, hypotheses of how the continents were arranged have become progressively refined. And I'm just going to go through a few diagrams from Christopher Scottesi's website showing reconstructions of especially the fragmentation of the southern supercontinent Gondwana over the last really 120 million years. So we can just go through a few really key points in that whole history. Gondwanan fragmentation started somewhere between 160 and 180 million years ago. By 120 million years ago, the last overland connection between India and Madagascar, which was a continental block, had moved away from the rest of Gondwana. So the last connection was severed at 120 million years ago. There was a connection through what's now Sri Lanka. Then 105 million years ago, the last connection between Africa and the rest of Gondwana was broken. And that was a connection through what is now tropical South America. About 65 million years ago, the last connection between a largely submerged continent, which now gets the name Zealandia, and the rest of Gondwana was broken. Then 37 million years ago, the Deepwater Channel between Australia and Antarctica, South America, formed. So this was just at the southern end of the South Tasman Rise, and that definitely separated Australia from all other continents. And prior to that, there had been, it's probably maybe severed about 40 million years ago, there was an overland connection between Australia and South America through Antarctica. And about 28 million years ago, the Drake Passage opened between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula. And that completely isolated Antarctica. And more importantly, it's allowed the establishment of a circumpolar Antarctic current, which has had all sorts of consequences for the world's climate and for, as we'll see, dispersal of plants and animals around the Southern Hemisphere. Another important event for Australia was the convergence of Australia as it drifted north with the Sunda Plate, which is, constitutes a large chunk of Southeast Asia and going through Malaysia and Indonesia. And so in the last 24 million years, the Australian plate has has come close enough to the Sunda plate to facilitate dispersal between Asia and Australia. So I'm just going to go through a number of the groups that are found in the Sydney region that can be attributed to this group of what we might call Gondwanan plants, plants that might have achieved their present-day distributions in the southern hemisphere by continental drift. So we'll start with the Sydney waratah, Tilapia speciosissima. So it's obviously close related to Tilapia truncata, one of the species that Joseph Hooker drew attention to, and this is a distribution of a group to which they belong. Joseph Hooker was wrong about them being close related to Knightia excelsa in New Zealand, but there are two other genera in this group that he didn't know about at the time. So the genus Aloxylon, represented here by the Dorrigo waratah, Aloxylon pinnatum, with three other species in North Queensland and southern New Guinea. Embothrium, which Joseph Hooker did mention, and in this connection, and also the genus Aureocallis, which includes one or two species in Peru and Ecuador in the Northern Andes. Lamatia, another genus that Hooker included in his list, includes Lamatia sciafolia and Lamatia myricoides in the Sydney region. And this is the distribution of Lamatia as we know it now. And we also have a couple of species, or three species in Chile and Argentina, including these two, Ferruginea and dentata. There's a third species, Hirsuta, which occurs in Chile and Argentina and also in Ecuador. And so we'll move on to additional groups in the Proteaceae now. So Pecunia planifolia is a representative in the Sydney region of a large genus of about 100 species that's endemic to Australia. And it has relatives on other Gondwanan landmasses. We've got Turonia toru in New Zealand and Garneria spatulafolia in New Caledonia. Isopogon anemonifolius and, well, all other species of Isopogon are actually part of a tribe, the tribe Leucodendri, in the present classification of the Proteaceae, which includes, and there's its distribution. It's widespread in southern Australia, but we also have species in the Cape region of southern Africa, with one species further north in tropical Africa. And in the group that's most closely related to Isopogon, we have one Australian genus, Adenanthos, which is now mostly restricted to southwestern Australia, although there's a couple of species in South Australia and one in western Victoria. And Isopogon and Adenanthos are closely related to the subtribe Leucodendrini, which includes a number of genera in southern Africa, and there are hundreds of species of them. So Leucodendron is one of those, represented on the left here by Leucodendron pubescens, and that's a male plant of Leucodendron pubescens. It's a dioecious genus. There are male and separate male and female plants. We've got Ceruria there, which includes about 55 species. Mimetes, represented by Mimetes fimbriifolius up in the left-hand corner there from the area just south of Cape Town. Orothamnus zayeri, a very rare species from the Western Cape. The genus Diastela, and the genus Leucospermum, which many of you will be familiar from cultivated plants and gardens here. This group that includes Paranomus, Vexatorella, Spatella, and Saurocephalus, none of which are really grown here at all because they're difficult subjects for horticulture, drop-dead plants. And this is an interesting group. Petrophily contrary to what we thought up until about well, the early 1990s, is not most closely related to Isopogon. Its closest relatives are 3 species from the Cape region of South Africa in the genus Orlax. This is one of those species, Orlax umbellata. It's a female plant on the left-hand side and male flowers on the right-hand side. Stenocarpus is represented in this region by Stenocarpus lignus. That's the distribution of Stenocarpus, and you can see it's in New Guinea, but also in New Caledonia. In fact, it's most diverse in New Caledonia. There are 13 species that are endemic there, and this is one of them, Stenocarpus umbelliferus. Grevillea is part of a large clade that includes Hakea, and with over 500 species. Excuse me. Most of which are endemic in Australia, but there's a genus, Finchia, which is actually deeply nested within Grevillea that occurs in New Guinea and the Palau Islands in Micronesia, and also in Vanuatu. And there are also 3 species of Grevillea in New Caledonia that are shown here. Some people are suggesting there's probably more species than this. Both Gillivrayi and Exel are quite variable. The genus Helicea is a really interesting one. This is Helicea glabriflora, photographed just down near Robertson. That's the southern limit of its distribution. And Helicea is very diverse in Southeast Asia. There are many more species in Southeast Asia and in New Guinea than there are in Australia. We've got about 10 species here. And this is one of the Asian ones, Helicea nilagirica from China and Vietnam. So this is one that doesn't have any Gondwana connections, but it's got connections with Southeast Asia that probably were established when the Sunda and Sahul or Australian plates converged with one another, and we're presently we're just embarking on a project to test this idea using methods that I'll get into later. Now, out of the Proteaceae into other families, in the Winteraceae, we've got Tasmania insipida in the Sydney region, which is closely related to, or Tasmania is closely related to a group of several genera, including Drimys from South America, Pseudowintera from New Zealand, and Zygoginum, which occurs in New Caledonia, Lord Howe Island, and also in North Queensland. In the family Atherospermataceae, in the Sydney region, we have Doryphora sassafras. We also have the genus Daphnandra, and they're closely related to Nemuaron in New Caledonia and Lorelia in both Chile and New Zealand. The eucalypts are in this group as well. So we've got the Sydney blue gum here, Eucalyptus saligna, Angophora hispida, and Corymbia gamifera, representing the Australian eucalypt group. And one of their close relatives is Arylastrum gamiferum from New Caledonia. They're flowers and buds of Arylastrum. There are other groups in the Myrtaceae, actually too numerous to really mention here, that have these Gondwana distributions, but Rhodomyrtus is one of them. And here we've got Rhodomyrtus loculatus from New Caledonia, and all of them are under dire threat from myrtle rust now, unfortunately. Tristaniopsis lorina is a familiar plant to all of us, both in the bush and as street trees. And that genus is quite diverse in New Caledonia, and it also stretches as far as, I think, Thailand and Southeast Asia. In the family Cunoniaceae, Calicomus radifolia is a common bushland plant of the Sydney region, and it's closely related to a couple of New Caledonian genera, Panchuria and Codia, which look very so certainly superficially similar to it. And Stratopetalum is represented in Sydney, the Sydney region, by two species, the Christmas bush, Stratopetalum gamiferum, and Stratopetalum apetalum, the coachwood. And Gamifera in particular has an extraordinarily close morphological resemblance to Platylophus trifoliatus from the Western Cape, and they are very close related. Actually, Inotopetalum from Tasmania is more close related to Platylophus, as it happens. It's fairly recent work that's discovered that. The Elaeocarpaceae is widespread in the southern hemisphere. Elaeocarpus is one that has relatives in other parts of Gondwana, such as in New Caledonia and also in New Zealand. Not South America though. And Boronia in the Rutaceae has several relatives in New Caledonia, including Boronia coniambiensis and Boronia verticillata. And Dracophyllum in the Ericaceae, represented by secundum in the Sydney region, is related to a large group of Dracophyllums that are endemic to New Zealand, and also quite a large group in New Caledonia. So that's just going through some of the groups that show these Gondwanan distribution patterns widespread in the Southern Hemisphere. So a lot of my work has been motivated by the desire to test the hypothesis that those distributions are the result of continental drift, that these plant groups have descended from ancestors, common ancestors that were widespread on Gondwanan pieces of land, and that they've been split up by geological change, and that's caused their evolutionary diversification. So the first sort of work that I did in this regard was collaboratively with Mike Crisp. This is a very old photograph of Mike taken in the 1980s. Peter, his son there with the blonde hair, is now in his mid-30s, and he's has a PhD in chemistry. Anyway, Mike and I, using morphological and anatomical characteristics, constructed this phylogenetic tree for the Orotar group, the subtribe Embothriinae. And the way we intended to use this tree to test the biogeographic hypothesis of that these are Gondwanan plants was to use a technique called cladistic biogeographic analysis. So in that method, you take that tree of species, which, this is a diagram that you can think of as representing lines of ancestors and their descendants, starting from an ancestor, a single common ancestor. I don't know if you can see my arrow there. A single common ancestor on the left-hand side here, gradually diversifying into all of these species that are with us now. And you can turn that tree diagram into a hypothesis of biogeographic relationships by substituting the names of a species with names of areas in which they occur. And this is what you do when you do this for the Embothriinae. And with a kind of analysis that I won't go into because it's a bit too complicated, you can convert that into an unambiguous statement of relationships between the areas. And this is what we got. And this tree here, representing relationships between those different areas, is statistically significantly supported. So we get this pattern out of that tree, and also by combining it with information from Lamatia, which is very closely related to the Embotryinae, to get this hypothesis of biogeographic relationships, which is consistent with the Gondwanic fragmentation of that distribution. So we've got South American areas here splitting apart from Australian plate areas, and then a disconnection between Tasmania and mainland areas and so on. So we took this to indicate that the Gondwanan hypothesis of the origin of these two groups, the Embotryinae and Lomatia, could be attributed to continental drift. So the fossil record is also a very useful source of evidence for testing biogeographic hypotheses. So for a start, plant groups that have gone extinct in certain places can be, we can find evidence of their existence where they no longer occur. So here we've got some beautiful eucalyptus fossils from Patagonia in South America. And with these, just here we've got an actual flower bud of a living eucalyptus on the bottom right-hand corner, being compared with these beautiful fossils from Patagonia from about 50 million years ago. You can see the little umbellasters of gum nuts here. In the Proteaceae, there are some beautiful macrofossils like this as well. This is a fossil inflorescence from the tribe Banksiae. It can even be attributed to a subtribe, the Musgraviinae, in the tribe Banksiae. So these are close relatives of Banksia, but these are now restricted to the rainforests of northeastern Queensland. This particular fossil came from Anglesea, just southwest of Melbourne. It's an Eocene fossil, so it's about, it's over 40 million years old. But most plant fossils are actually pollen grains, because pollen grains have quite a resilient outer covering, and the exene, and some, a lot of groups can be identified from their pollen grains. This is a 70 million year old pollen grain, Propylopollis ambiguus, and Denton and Jarson, who published this paper, from which I got these images, thought that it so closely resembled the pollen grain of Tilapia truncata, the Tasmanian waratah, that they identified it as Tilapia. The problem with this identification was that it was too specific, because all of the features that led them to identify that as Tilapia are shared by some of the other members of the whole of the Embotryinae, such as the Dorigo waratah, Eloxylum pinnatum. So this actually was, their identification of that fossil as Tilapia was too specific. It's really, it's a good fossil representative of this whole subtribe, the Embotryinae, but not of Tilapia in particular. Now, the latest tool we've put into testing these biogeographic hypotheses is a technique called molecular dating, where we take DNA sequences. This is quite an old DNA sequence that we got from an automated sequencer maybe 20 years ago, which gave us about 500 base pairs of DNA sequence for a particular sequence that we're comparing among different species of Proteaceae. And Nigel Barker from Rose University in South Africa was involved in this work, as was Hervé Sauquet, who's at this point was still working in Paris, but now he's one of the newer botanists in the herbarium at Botanic Gardens. And together we, and with some other colleagues, produced this analysis that we published about 11 years ago now, which is a phylogeny based on DNA sequences, comparison of DNA sequences that included at least one sample from each genus in the family. Excuse me. And using a method that models the rate of change, rate of molecular evolutionary change, and calibrating the tree we have with various fossils of the Proteaceae, we're able to put an absolute timescale on this tree. And this gave us some surprises. So, for example, this group in the top half of a diagram with hot colours, indicating in this particular paper that that these lineages had very high diversification rates in the Cape region of South Africa. This group here, which is the subtribe Leucodendrini, which is endemic to Southern Africa, is far too young to have separated from Adenanthos, its closest relative, which is this green lineage here, and got to where it is now by continental drift. Because if we look at the timing of that diversification there, or that divergence, it's less than 40 million years ago. And for connections between Australia and Africa to be attributable to continental drift, they have to be back at 105 million years old, not under 40. So this was telling us that our idea that not so long ago that all of these groups in the Proteaceae that had got around the southern hemisphere and were separated by large ocean gaps actually got there by long distance dispersal across the ocean rather than by continental drift. And I better hurry up here. This is just an analysis of that group, the Embothriinae, or the tribe Embothriae, where the branches are color-coded by their distributions. And you can see that group that included Waratahs, Embothrium, Aloxylon oricalis, did differentiate at the right time for its distributional pattern to be explicable by continental drift. And so did Lamatias, as it happens. And but some of the other distributional patterns, like the connections between Australia and New Caledonia, so blue and yellow in this diagram, are actually too young to be the result of continental drift, because that's when Zealandia was split from the rest of Gondwana. And well, eucalyptus is a group where this is an analysis that Mike Crisp and his colleagues published, showing that in Arylastrum, the New Caledonian species, separated from its closest relatives in Australia, well, according to their analysis, about 53 million years ago. It's probably a bit too young to be the result of continental drift. Likewise, in Dracophyllum, the timing of the splits between Australia, New Caledonia, and New Zealand is far too young to be the result of continental drift. So these various groups must have got to where they are by long distance dispersal across the sea gaps. And this is a diagram from a paper that we published in 2009 showing that a lot of the connections between Australia and South America can be, 13 out of 20 of them can reasonably be attributed to continental drift. They're young enough, they're old enough to be explained that way, but hardly any of the connections between Australia and New Zealand or Australia and New Caledonia can reasonably be explained by continental drift, and hardly any of the connections with Africa either. And that's just a diagram indicating well reconstructed dispersal events around the southern hemisphere. And we're thinking that a better explanation for those distributional patterns, for many of them, is that the circumpolar Antarctic current is capable of conveying propagules around the southern hemisphere, either floating on water or blown through the air. So our conclusion was that Joseph Hooker was right about some members of the austral flora, but that Darwin was right about most of them. And that's the end of my talk. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sorry if I've gone over time a bit. So do I stop sharing? And I don't know how you want to organise questions, but
what I suggest is that if anyone wants to ask a question, just type a question in the chat box.
okay.
While people are thinking about that, I will just say I've realised that one of the unintended benefits of Zoom meetings is you can see the photos so clearly. I was just blown away by the photo quality compared to, sitting at the back of our Gaimi hall and looking at the screen in the distance. I was really amazed by both the good quality photos that you showed there. So thanks for that, Peter.
Yes.
I do see we might have a couple of questions. Okay, this one's from Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Could some seed be dispersed by migratory birds, for example, historically?
They could be. We don't know. Testing hypotheses of how plants have got around, is really difficult. So an obvious one, I suppose, in the Proteaceae is to do experiments about whether the seeds or fruits, the propagules, actually float in seawater, and we haven't done that yet. But for example, the macadamia group, the tribe Macadamiae, does seem overall to be too young to have established its wide distribution across the southern hemisphere by continental drift, and they have big heavy seeds that might have floated. That's our best explanation for their distributional pattern now.
Sounds like there are some opportunities there, Dan, for some PhD level research for you. And we just also have a comment from Jill saying, as well as being able to see the photos so well, it's been great being able to hear so well as well. So thank you, Peter. And Jason Salmon says, would it be likely that seed has been sent high into the atmosphere by fire events? And Dan adds, and possibly by cyclones and storms.
Probably cyclones and storms more than fire events, I suppose. Look, I actually gave up speculating on how plants got around by long distance dispersal, because back in 1996, Mike Crisp and I published a book chapter in which we went through the regular means of dispersal of the plants we were talking about, Proteaceae, and argued quite convincingly to ourselves anyway that none of the Proteaceae were capable of undergoing long distance dispersal at all. And the problem is that some of these plant groups are doing these trips about once every 30 million years.
So it's hard to observe. Okay. Now,
not only that, but also the regular means of dispersal that plants are adapted to undergo probably isn't the way they cross ocean gaps.
Definitely a lot to research there. Now, Andrew Rowlett's just raised the question of India, but I'm just going to leave that there for the moment. And I'm going to say, Peter, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for being our very first monthly meeting speaker by Zoom. I think you've shown us how successfully it can be done, and we'll definitely be pursuing that. So thank you very much, Peter. And I think a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
And if we've got time at the end, we can sort of come back and maybe have some more questions there. But the next segment in our meeting tonight is going to be trying to do our plant table by Zoom. Now, thanks very much to everyone who sent in some photos to Dan. Dan's compiled those into a PowerPoint, and now we're going to ask Dan to share his screen to talk about plants for our plant table.
Rhonda's on mute. Okay, well, I better move. This was sent in by Peter. Menthus saturoides, a native mint that you can find commonly in New South Wales. I don't know. I've seen it inland on creek lines and valley flats and sheltered places like that. Quite a nice plant, ground cover. Peter sent this one in. I'm not sure if he propagates it, but might work well from cuttings and things like that. If the people who sent these in want to chip in with a comment, please do if you can.
Although feel free just to keep going, Dan.
Okay, close up of the flowers, you know, opposite leaves, typical Lamiaceae, related to oregano, lemon balm, lavender, rosemary, all those sort of things. I think it's now being used possibly in, you know, Master Chef and all that sort of thing. Might make a good tea, I'm not too sure. Leonie sent these in, a mixture of potted things that she's mucking around with or experimenting with. Sclerenthus by Florus is on the black chair in a pot. Oops. And she's also got some Isotoma axillaris growing out of that pot as well. Leonie tells me she's propagated these, I think. A stylidium, a trigger plant, I believe is in one of the other pots here somewhere, though I'm not sure if it's this one with the face on it. Leonie might be able to enlighten us there. And she's done some rhodanthe seedlings as well. So Leonie sent that in, so I just thought to have a look. I guess the point is there, you can throw a lot of these natives into pots and they do quite well. It's just another option for people who might be short of space or something like that. John Aitken has sent in some photos from Burnham Reserve in Sydney, taken recently, and I thought this was really tricky of John to send me both of these, but I threw them up together for anyone interested. On the left, we have Woolsea pungens, and growing alongside it in a lot of places, you can find a very similar Apache Pulchella, and some people have questions in the past or on bushwalks, how do you tell the difference? You can see the leaves are very similar, but if you just look at those overlapping petals of the Woolsea with those sort of crinkly lines on them as well, that's a bit of a giveaway. And the Apache Pulchella, you got the petals are sort of separate with sort of space in between. Don't really have that sort of same sort of appearance and crinkly lines. But if you get them both not in flower, you can see the leaves are very, very similar. Can be a bit hard to tell apart, but what you do notice is Woolsea tends to flower pretty much almost most of the year, I find, in Sydney anyway. So that was a good one, John. I'm not sure if you did that deliberately to trip us up. That was good. John sent this in. All I can think is this is Corymbia Gamifera, but John photographed it recently. Corymbia Gamifera flowers in around January, as far as I know. This was taken in April, but I can't think what else that is in Burnham on sandstone. If anyone's got a comment, please type it in. Someone like Jason might know better, but yeah, that's a nice shot, John. Two really good photos here of AmericaforMesa, again from John. I put the inflorescence and the fruit together. You can really see that devil's head there, which is a good shot. A follicle that splits open on one side and aligns with Peter's talk on the Proteaceae. And the last one from John was a native carrot. If you don't know it, Platysaceae linearifolia. This is a really, really common plant in Sydney sandstone. The leaves smell like carrot really strongly, and it's related. It's in that Apiaceae family, so we tend to call them our native carrots, though I don't think they've got a taproot anywhere near as big. But very nice shot, John. The flowers are tiny. They're hard to bring to focus a lot of the time. They're not very big at all, but they're in those compound umbels, which is a really good feature for Apiaceae, if you get familiar with it. Moving on to Claire. Claire McCall sent in this beautiful Banksia birthday candles. Stunning plant, really well done there, Claire. The great thing about this, we said, was you can see the plants growing in their natural, in their homes anyway, which at the meetings we don't ever get to see that, but members are going to really show off their plants here. And a Banksia Rollercoaster spilling over a wall there. Very nice, Claire, thanks for that. That was her too. Jenny and Martin Whiting sent in this one, which I think is a Petunia lanceolata. A lot of people are planting petunias now, and they seem to grow really well. I've thrown a few in the backyard recently, like Pinifolia, and they seem to grow really well. I don't know how they go long term, but if I'm wrong about that one, Jenny, let me know. That's what I thought it was. I didn't get told what these were, by the way, which was good for me. I just got sent the photos. It was fantastic. Flannel Flower from Jenny again, growing, looks like a bit of natural habitat here, possibly, even if it's in a backyard. Sandstone outcrop, actinotus growing with some caustus. Yep. That's quite common in the Sydney sandstone bushland.
Yeah, that was actually one of the flannel flower that I grew from seed from Lloyd's session back in a while ago.
Oh, lovely.
Planted a couple of them in my garden. So
beautiful.
That's the time it's flowered.
Yeah, you've really mimicked the natural environment there. It's fantastic. Yeah, really good. And was that caustus always there, or did you didn't propagate? Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah, whoever can propagate that can write their own checks. Good one. And I thought this was Pulcinea tuberculata. Would I be right?
I'm not quite sure. I look at it in the book, and that's what I thought it was, but I'm really not sure.
Okay, that's what I think it is. It's common in areas like the Central Coast, around Brisbane waters and Booty and places like that. You see it in Sydney as well. Yeah, that's what I'd say that is. That's a really nice specimen. Beautiful. Yeah, check that one out. That's what that should be. That's a really nice one. Okay, I better get through these. On to Joan. Joan sent me this beautiful Viola Banksi, grown as a ground cover. That's really stunning, Joan, especially that flower colour. That's one I should grow. It's beautiful. Yeah, I haven't tried that one. Really nice. That's a really variable species, those violas, but that's a nice one. Joan sent in this Isotomer as well, which she told me was propagated from material that Aileen gave her, I believe. That's really nice. And a Wallenberger, which, wow, is doing really stunningly. I'm not sure what species it is, Joan, you might know. But that's really nice. Joan's not there. Keep moving. Yeah, that's a stunning ground cover she's got going there. Beautiful plant. And this Banksia Spinulosa, I think, if it's not one of the cultivars that Joan sent in as well, that's also really stunning. Beautiful plant. It's a great time of year for Banksias normally around now.
So we've got these too.
On to Ralph. Ralph sent me Buckinghamia Salsissima. That's a real must-have for gardens, I reckon. There's some nice ones going around here. Beautiful plant, really hardy. Seems to grow really well. I love those.
On the road for
Ostromertus dulcis, Ralph sent in as well. That's a really good one, Ralph. Stunning plant. Close up of the fruit, the midgeonberry.
Down the bottom too.
Yeah, that's really nice, Ralph. And then I believe Ralph is now trying to show off his copious crop of finger limes. Tell me if I'm wrong, Ralph. Look at him on the ground. Jeez.
100 this year.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I can't get one on mine.
Me either.
Yeah. How long you been growing that for, Ralph?
Maybe 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, nice one. Well, that's really good. Yeah, if you grow that one, it's a beautiful plant to grow. Mine's growing really slowly, but in the last year or two with a bit of rain, it's coming nicely now, but I still haven't got a fruit off it. But yeah, it's a popular plant these days. Beautiful fruit. And Tony Porritt sent me this Verticordia, a plant endemic to Western Australia. Is Tony there? Does he want to say anything? I don't know too much about this one. Tony there at all? Or anyone want to say anything about this plant? If they grow it, I'm a big ignorant on this one. So happy for anyone to jump in.
Is it grafted?
Not sure. He did send me some content on the email, maybe where it was from basically, but it's a Myrtaceae species, and he's got this one growing really nicely, beautiful flowers. I just didn't have time to do any research on this one, but I was hoping Tony could jump in. But
Dan,
yeah.
Can you hear me? It's Murray.
Yeah, Murray.
We've got some. We got them. It's a Western Australian.
Yeah.
And we got them from Carlo Italiano in the East Hills group.
Yeah.
And there are different shades of pinks and to that deep colour.
Yep.
And so I've got one that's, I don't know, about a metre or half a metre sort of in the front, in the full sun. And Tony's got his in the front of his place in full sun.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
Nice one.
And I've got a little one in that I put in a while ago, but that's what they are. And they're very pretty.
Yeah. 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 Thanks, Murray. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. All right. That's it, everyone. I got through those pretty quick. That's the end of that. Thanks for the photos.
Draw the meeting to a close now and say thanks very much to everyone for participating, and hope to see you at our next Zoom meeting, which might be our AGM. And as we mentioned in the newsletter, if you'd like to send any comments or feedback about how all this went, do send an email to Peter Shelton and he'll pass that on to the committee through the newsletter. So thanks very much, everyone, and happy gardening and exercising and looking after plants, and we'll catch up with everyone soon. So good night, everyone.